Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and your existential Mr. Rogers. And I'm, of course, Robcasting at you, Robcasting from the Robservatory, at you, imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This would be Robservations, episode number 703. My God. Well, another Marvel series debuted today, Loki. And, of course, starring Tom Hiddleston as the titular character Loki. Coming back, once again, playing the role he originated a decade ago in the first Thor movie. My God, has it really been a decade? While, yes, Virginia, it has been a decade. And, This series goes full-on comic book lore. There's a lot of crazy wackiness to be had here. And I have to tell you, I loved it. I thought for a beginning, a very auspicious beginning, I really loved this show. And there's not things I'm not going to criticize, but for the most part, I really love the show. And what I have to say, first and foremost, I've been saying this, twice today already, I'm going to say it again on my own show, is that one of the things that I've really appreciated is about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I think one of its greatest successes is in the fact that Kevin Feige, Louis D'Esposito, and Victoria Alonso, along with all of their longtime compatriots, Confederates, all the people that have been working on the MCU back since 2008, really before that, because they had to have made the movie before that, made Iron Man 1. They've always looked back towards the comic books, the Marvel comic book universe that has previously been published for ideas. They don't necessarily directly adopt things, but they certainly are inspired by those things. Captain America, the Winter Soldier. They went back to Captain America, the Winter Soldier, run by Ed Brubaker. It wasn't exact, but they took enough. I mean, you can't... Adapting comic books directly would be a little silly because comic books are different than real life, and things don't work exactly like they would in the real world, so that's why they adapt them. But the fact that they're getting all of their ideas from the comic books is something that I think a lot of other franchises could stand to learn from. And Loki introduces the time variance authority to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, this is a pretty wacky concept. More so than Infinity Stones and the Celestials and when the universe was created by kind of a thing. This is the furthest out, I think, with a science fiction comic book-esque concept that the MCU has gone, and it's gone pretty far out. And I think what I want to do before I talk about Loki is I want to talk about the time variance authority and where it came from in the Marvel Universe. Well, it was created by Walt Simonson and Sal Buscema, and it was created in the issue of Thor, issue 371, in September of 1986. So we're dealing with a comic book concept, the TVA, that is 35 years old, within the Marvel Universe, and created by Walt Simonson, who, of course, did one of the great runs on Thor ever. So I love the fact that they're incorporating this into the Loki series. I think it's pretty amazing. The leader of the Time Variance Authority was Mr. Alternity, which I think is kind of fun. And their aliases are the Timekeepers, the Interstellar Committee on Superhuman Arms Control, the Bureau of Mass Destruction, Worthington Industries, and Death's Head. Now let me read what the Marvel database has to say about the Time Variance Authority. The TVA, the Time Variance Authority, is an infinitely vast bureaucracy that governs a significant number of realities in the ever-growing multiverse. The organization has dedicated itself to keeping tabs on every reality that exists. It controls a temporal dominion, which is approximately 2 or 3 times as large as Kang's temporal empire. All employees are born and bred specifically to complete their functions. Every employee in the Time Variance Authority has lifetime employment. It is an organization of faceless bureaucrats. Most TVA employees are cloned from the same genetic stock to reduce disputes and improve efficiency. However, they do recruit new promising candidates such as Justice Peace. Now, if one of my biggest, I think, complaints with Loki, the series, is they made the TVA rather ordinary. I was talking about this with Az on his show when we were doing this week's episode of Hot Toys. I really thought they really sort of humanized the TVA, and to bring them down to earth. Of course, it's very diverse in terms of its hiring, the actors they hired to play these parts. But in a way, I thought it really sort of brought down the TVA and made it a little bit more ordinary than I would have wanted it to be. And in a way, it was kind of distracting. And I was sort of bothered by that, not because I don't have a problem with the diversity in casting, but it was very human-centric. I mean, I don't mind if you have black characters or white characters or gray characters or yellow characters or little people characters. I don't care, but it seemed very humanocentric, and that seemed odd to me. When you have all of the universe to draw from, it was not populated with anything other than very American, earthbound humans. And that seemed a bit odd. It seemed like there was a great opportunity to... I would have made them more nameless and faceless, more scary. Maybe like the former humans in The Black Hole, the movie, the Disney film The Black Hole. Because they were faceless, they were scarier. But this seemed a little bit ordinary, whereas I love the way the TVA was depicted. I thought their personnel, it was a little Homo sapien-centric, which I thought was, that was my only real criticism of how it was depicted. I really enjoyed it. But let me give you an example of a story in the Marvel Cinematic Universe of the TVA. And again, this comes from the Marvel Fandom database. The Time Trial of She-Hulk. When the millionaire Charles Zurkowsky was put on trial for attempted murder, he claimed it was in self-defense due to the victim being a time traveler that a message from the future warned him about. Charles sought representation from Goodman, Lieber, Katzberg, and Holloway, the law firm where She-Hulk's alter ego Jen Walters worked. Since the case was widely covered by the media and it was near impossible to find an unbiased jury, GLKNH's head Artie Zix arranged to have the TVA bring people from the near past who were dead in the present at the time of the trial. One of the time-displaced jurors was Clint Barton, the hero known as Hawkeye and a close friend of Walters. Throughout the trial, Jen attempted to warn Barton about his impending death to no avail. The trial was interrupted when Zurkowsky summoned a robot as a distraction to escape. Returning to his workshop, he disguised his appearance and sent his past self a warning. Realizing that he had become the person the message warned him about, Zurkowsky attempted to send his past self a second message. He was stopped by Justice Peace, who forced Zurkowsky into a time machine on behalf of the TVA, so he would be shot by his past self, closing the paradox. Following the resolution of this case, the TVA arrested Walters for her attempts to warn Hawkeye. She was brought to a trial presided in part by Mr. Mobius, who is obviously played by Owen Wilson in the new series, the new Loki series, to decide if she was to be erased from existence. She-Hulk saw herself demoralized by a glimpse into a future of a conflict of cosmic scales caused the Reckoning War had sparked because of her, and pleaded guilty. However, the supervillain Clockwise then hijacked the trial and went on a rampage, blasting the retroactive canon. After She-Hulk stopped Clockwise, Mobius considered the heroine's guilty plea and subsequently ruled in her favor after the numerous testimonies of the people that She-Hulk helped beyond superheroics convinced him that removing her from the timeline would endanger the entire continuum. However, since She-Hulk was still guilty of tampering with time, Mobius decided to have one of the TVA's prisoners remanded to her custody as punishment, and she chose the Two-Gun Kid. So that's just one of the stories of the TVA in the Marvel Comics universe, and it kind of shows where they're going. Very fantastical, very fantasy, but also sort of very interesting. Now, one of the things that I really enjoyed, obviously, about the Loki series is it opens, and I'm not going to give anything away because we've seen these things before. It opens with clips from Avengers, the 2012 Avengers, and Avengers Endgame, where they combine two things together. And that is, of course, you see Loki's apprehension, and then when he's brought out into the lobby of the building, when Loki's brought in the lobby of, I guess, Avengers Plaza, we see that Loki, as it's played out in Avengers Endgame, is able to get the Tesseract. But remember, this is the Loki from 2012. We all know from Infinity War and Endgame that Loki was killed by Thanos at the beginning of Infinity War, and that takes place right after Thor Ragnarok. So our Loki, the Loki that we have followed, is dead. He does not exist. But in Endgame, because of the events of the Avengers going back in time to 2012, there was something that disrupted the timeline, the way time was supposed to flow, with Loki being taken back to Asgard and the events of Thor, the Dark World happening. Loki is able to get the Tesseract and is able to escape. But that is the Loki of 2012. It is not the Loki that has, over the last 8 years, learned something about himself, the error of his ways, so to speak, or whatever, however you want to call it. And he is the Loki that hasn't gone through the Dark World, has not gone through Ragnarok, has not gone through the other movies of the MCU where he's actually shown growth. That never happened for the Loki as portrayed in the Loki series. So it's Loki of 2012. He, of course, finds himself in a strange area, and then he is apprehended by the Time Variance Authority. So he's a different Loki than the one that we've known, the one that we follow. Now, I, for one, I'm not going to really get into spoilers here, but I really enjoyed the show because it's basically a show that's, I really like the relationship that was developing between Owen Wilson's character of Mr. Mobius, like a Mobius loop, and Loki. And the central question Mobius has for Loki is really, who are you and why do you like to do the things you want to do? And I think that the series is going to be about Loki facing down those questions. I suspect I know where it might be going, and I'm very excited to see where it's going. But I wanted to read an article first, start with an article from the Atlantic that talks about where the series is going. And it's by Shirley Lee. And I guess there's mild spoilers in this article. And it came out today, and it said, for more than a decade, the studio's films and shows have been paragons of careful continuity. So far, Loki does away with that. I don't think that's true. For 13 years, the Marvel Cinematic Universe built up the Infinity Stones as objects of grand power, capable of manipulating all existence when united. In Avengers Infinity War, they turned half of the cosmos to dust. In Avengers Endgame, the surviving heroes chased them down across time. In Loki, the Disney Plus series released today, they're nothing more than colorful paperweights. The cheeky gag befits a series about a trickster god, but it's a surprising one for Marvel to pull. The studio has never dismissed its own storytelling this way. More than a dozen films insisted on the profundity of the stones, yet in a single scene, Loki learns that the objects he's long sought, and by extension the objects fans have been conditioned to care about, are mere office supplies at the Time Variance Authority, the bureaucratic entity that has captured him. Not only that, but Loki's told that the TVA controls time itself and thus has allowed his every move. His actions have never been his own. By placing a fan-favorite character in an unfamiliar world populated with unrecognizable characters and then promptly introducing him to an existential crisis, Loki challenges Marvel's tried-and-true formula of lighthearted action plus airtight continuity. Each of the studio's films and TV shows has not only told its own story, but made sure to connect to the others through shared characters, common settings, and scenes that advance the overarching narrative. WandaVision was stylistically weird as a sitcom pastiche, but the series remained tethered to the MCU's conventions as a dutiful sequel to Endgame and a precursor to the next Doctor Strange film. Loki, however, is neither an epilogue nor prologue, at least not in the 2 episodes screened for critics. Its structure, ideas, and visual language feel unconstrained by the MCU's blueprints. Instead, the series traffics in true comic book storytelling. It's an experimental, self-contained, and thoroughly welcome reprieve. After all, Hiddleston's not even playing the Loki that audiences know, but a Loki variant from another timeline. In other words, a version of the villain without all of the MCU-imposed character development. He's been boiled down to the central components of his personality, petulant, entitled, mischievous, and given room to be chameleonic as soon as the series begins. In episode 1, he's a fish out of water, verbally sparring with his handler, the TVA agent Mobius, in what amounts to a supervillain therapy session. I am not going to say what happens in episode 2, but I'm not going to say anything. The look of the Disney Plus show 2 evokes comic book versatility. The TVA's headquarters is awash in mid-century meets futurist architecture, while its agents' missions will take them to branch timelines, riffing off the aesthetics of works such as Before Sunrise and Inglourious Bastards, according to head writer Michael Waldron. As a result, the show looks nothing like previous Marvel properties. Loki also contemplates the MCU's tendency to situate its central conflict between two characters who represent opposing values. In the show, Loki's threatened not only by a superhero, but by another so-and-so, which he begrudgingly admires. And the great threat appears to be the TVA itself. Everyone Loki meets at the organization comes off as somewhat inhuman, alien not just in lifestyle but in personality. If even the wackiest MCU characters emanate some humanity, the TVA staff remains strangely apathetic and even cruel. One TVA captive gets disintegrated for arguing with an agent. The Hunters, agents who prune the branches of errant timelines, use devices that wipe out all living things affected by a variant. Such brutal efficiency, the show suggests, come from the all-powerful nature of the Timekeepers, a trio of unseen figures who created every TVA agent and who keep the so-called sacred timeline intact. The administration staff worship the Timekeepers like gods, believing wholly in their mission to keep the flow of the universe's events to one trajectory. The TVA conducts its affairs so tightly that an office drone Loki meets have never heard of a fish, and Mobius admits that he yearns to ride a jet ski but cannot for the unspecified fears of damaging the timeline. These are small, seemingly throwaway revelations that ultimately feel more sinister than absurd. At the TVA, continuity is essential but suffocating. That's a provocative idea from a studio that's known for meticulously planning every step of its storytelling, and it's a risky one. As much as Loki may buck tradition, it remains a Marvel show, watched by fans who celebrate the granular attention to the bigger picture. Waldron also worked on the script for the Doctor Strange sequel. The chances that this 6-episode season eventually yields a tie-in to that sacred MCU timeline are high. Yet 2 episodes in, Loki plants the idea that order, as exemplified by the TVA and in a meta way by the MCU, is nowhere near as fun as leaning into the chaos of the comic books. Whenever Loki disrupts the TVA's strategy and encourages Mobius to tag along, he introduces a sense of play that Mobius begins to relish. Similarly, Loki, in drawing inspiration not from the established MCU method but from the looser narratives of comic books, feels like a refreshing reset for the franchise. The series indicates to fans that it might not be essential for everything to be thoroughly connected, perhaps as some stories can be enjoyed as, say, standalone variants. Again, that was an article that appeared in The Atlantic today, and it was written by Shirley Lee, which, I liked. I think it's a pretty good point. But I do think what's very interesting about this show is when we start getting into things like time travel, or some of my favorite, like comic books, for instance, Sandman, the idea of his realm, the dreaming that exists in creation, or that hell is a place. When you move into the time variance authority here, it's incredibly wacky, and it's very far removed. It's as far removed as you can imagine from Iron Man 1. And for the MCU started with the idea of a man really discovering himself, understanding the error of his ways. And I think in a way, Loki takes that idea full circle. Sure, we're going to have some time-traveling detective story where Loki himself has to solve a riddle, a mystery. But also, it's really about him coming to grips with who he is, which is why I was so fascinated by the first episode. I thought, okay, the verbal sparring that Owen Wilson and Loki and Tom Hiddleston do is very existential in nature. What are you, Loki? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the reason behind it? And the question is, do we wonder, does Loki know? But I thought it was this is why the show to me shined, because at the end of the day, it's always first and foremost about character. Now, I've seen a lot of people bitch and moan and complain about the show being, call it what you want, the old W word and the diversity hires and all that. It does smack a little bit of that, but really, that's all set dressing. That's all very superficial. I think after one episode, if I can say, the question is really being asked of both the audience and of Loki, what do we think of this character? Why does he do what he does? Why do we like him? And these questions are in a meta way being asked to Loki himself in the first episode of the show, and it's fascinating to watch. Sure, there's some wacky hijinks that ensue, but I think the idea of the Time Variance Authority and the idea of the Timekeepers opens up the door for some heady material, heady exploration in terms of things like free will and destiny and all that. And do we really have free will, or is everything we do predestined, or is it a combination of the two? The fact that a show in the MCU can make us think about these things at all, I think makes it very much worthwhile. I think all three of the Marvel shows have been worthwhile to varying degrees, and certainly were they everything to all people? No. But I think overall, as far as shows in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're all pretty great. And I think Loki, after one episode, is looking to be quite interesting. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where it shapes up. Now, I'm gonna talk about something now. There's another article that was in Variety today that I'm also going to read that is a spoiler-rific article. So I'm going to hold up my hand like this. If you don't want to know spoilers, well then, tune out now, and I'll put my hand back up again when you can come back. So, let's dip into this article, shall we? This article, Loki series premiere, stripped down Tom Hiddleston explores a new timeline for the God of Mischief. Adam B. Very wrote this article. It was published at 7 o'clock this morning. For the first decade of his time in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the character of Loki has been tethered to his brother, Thor. Even after Tom Hiddleston's delightful performance as Loki in 2012's Avengers made him the internet's bad boyfriend, the God of Mischief's arc within the MCU always unfolded in tandem with the God of Thunder's, up to the moment when Thor was forced to watch Thanos snap Loki's neck in Avengers Infinity War. That all changes with Loki. Marvel Studios' first Disney Plus series, dedicated to a single character, promises to explore what makes this beloved character tick by extricating him from all the external signifiers that have come to define the character. His brother, Asgard, the Avengers, his signature royal arraignements, and even everything that happened to the character after he first catapulted to global superstardom in the Avengers. To do all that, however, requires not a small amount of disentangling, but also a rather heady amount of world building, and that's what this inaugural episode dedicates itself to doing. It starts with a quick recap of Loki's last moments in 2019 Avengers Endgame, when the 2012 version of Loki used the Tesseract to escape capture after the Battle of New York. After getting spit into the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, Loki barely gets a sentence into his speechifying about his glorious purpose before agents from the Time Variance Authority appear, promptly arresting Loki for deviating from his set path and pull him inside wherever the TVA is meant to reside. From that moment on, Loki and the audience are charting brand new territory with the MCU. We learn that after some ancient multiversal war, time as we know it has unfolded on a single sacred path, thanks to the TVA's tireless efforts to prune away any unintended deviations that could create a branch universe. We learn that when Loki grabbed the Tesseract, his path split from everything he was meant to do, making this Loki a dangerous variant within the MCU's sacred timeline. We learn that the reason we've never seen the TVA before is that the previous feature films and TV series with the MCU were all unfolding as they were expected to, so the TVA never had to show itself. And we learn that a mustachioed TVA agent named Mobius has not only studied Loki's every waking moment, but also believes this variant Loki could help him stop an even more dangerous threat to the TVA and possibly to time itself. That's a lot of things to learn in one episode. Much of it raised even more questions. Here are the biggest ones. Who are the Timekeepers, really? The Marvel Comics mythology for the Timekeepers is perhaps not surprisingly a little complicated. And as we've already learned from WandaVision and the Falcon and Winter Soldier, knowledge of Marvel Comics lore is only going to take our understanding of Marvel Studios' production so far. Even if the music is familiar, the MCU still marches to its own beat, and we understand so little about how the Timekeepers operate in this show that it seems unhelpful to try and forecast where we're headed based on what's happened before in the comics. For example, in the comics, while Ravonna Renslayer, I can't pronounce his name, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, has a tangled history involving diverging realities, she isn't involved with the TVA. And yet on Loki, she's a TVA judge who has seemingly been a part of the temporal bureaucracy for her entire existence. Raw has even said that director Kate Herron told her to think of Loki as Ravonna's origin story, though that doesn't quite still clear up why in the comics she didn't come from the TVA. All of which is to say, I'm still gathering data on what the TVA is and how it fits into Loki and the MCU. Like Loki, I'm not quite convinced that everything happening here is on the up and up. Did anyone else get a vibe that the Timekeepers maybe don't exist anymore? Judge Renslayer says they're far too busy to talk with Loki, and yet the seemingly infinite scope of the TVA does not appear to match the small trickle of variants who we see working their way through the system. I keep couching these descriptions in what we see because I'm keenly aware that we're dealing with a show about the god of mischief. Loki himself first declares the TVA to be an illusion and a cruel, elaborate trick conjured by the weak to inspire fear. Of course, Loki is really talking about himself, but the TVA's ability to just erase variant timelines that stray from the predetermined path is not terrifying either. Isn't not terrifying either. For now, though, it's probably best to take the TVA at face value, since by the end of the episode, after he's witnessed the highlights of his entire life story, thanks to TVA's hit show This Would Have Been Your Life, Loki believes the TVA to be the greatest power in the universe. And if that is the case, then one long-held fan theory about Avengers Endgame appears to have been turned to dust. At the end of Endgame, Steve Rogers leaves his present time and takes the Infinity Stones back to the moments when they'd been plucked from our history. He's supposed to jump back after he finishes, but instead it seems he took a detour, living a quiet life with Peggy Carter in the 1940s, before eventually reappearing in his time as a very old man to pass along his shield, a shield destroyed by Thanos, to Sam Wilson. Since 2019, fans have presumed that the enormous plot holes in that turn of events sparked by the multiverse that Marvel Studios kept indicating is around the corner in Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And yet, when Loki tells Judge Renslayer that the TVA should really be after the Avengers since they were the ones hopping through time, she dismisses his argument out of hand. What they did was supposed to happen, she says. You escaping was not. If Renslayer is telling the truth, then somehow nothing Steve did unsettled the sacred timeline. Or at the very least, whatever damage Steve may have done was quickly tidied up by the TVA, given that so many variants and utterly inert Infinity Stones have made their way into the TVA that some agents use them as paperweights. And yet we all know Doctor Strange in his Multiverse of Madness heading our way in 2022, so something's got to fracture the sacred timeline. If Steve didn't do it, who will? Has no one heard of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the TVA? Let's take a quick moment to pay our respects to Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The show was created by Marvel's now defunct TV division in 2013 to be an extension of the MCU and resurrected Clark Gregg's agent Phil Coulson in the process. But even though the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. ran for 7 seasons on ABC and only concluded last August when Mobius provoked Loki over Coulson's death, he didn't even hint at the fact that Coulson had actually lived. That's probably because the final seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. indulge in all kinds of time travel shenanigans, resulting in a permanently altered timeline, none of which seems to factor into Loki. It really does seem like, as far as Marvel Studios is concerned, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is not part of the MCU, which is a shame. While most of the episode tracked Loki's dawning realization that his glorious purpose was, in Mobius's words, to cause pain and suffering and death, so that others can achieve the best versions of themselves, we were treated to one brief interlude depicting some of Loki's herefore unseen mischief-making. Namely, that Loki was the identity of D.B. Cooper, the real-life man who in 1971 hijacked a Boeing 727, flying from Portland to Seattle, collected $200,000 in cash, and then leaped out of the plane in a parachute, never to be seen or heard from again. The escapade was so much fun that it made me wonder if we'll be getting a few more examples when Loki has stepped into human history from some trickstery larks. Perhaps he's responsible for the Loch Ness Monster, creating the Georgia Guidestones. The mind boggles. This is a tricky question to address honestly. The press was able to preview both the first and second episodes of Loki, and it should not be a surprise to anyone to say episode 2 has more information about what Mobius means when he tells Loki that the TVA is hunting... I'll leave that blank. It is at least safe to note that Hiddleston said that Loki is about identity in the same way that WandaVision was about grief, and the prospect of at least one other Loki out there making lethal mischief suggests that our Loki will have the opportunity to literally observe himself in action. For my own sanity's sake, however, I am relieved that Heron has put to rest any speculation that this new Loki is somehow also the Marvel villain Mephisto, telling Entertainment Tonight that the stained glass window of a red devil in the premiere is genuinely a reference to Loki, the horns he was cast out of heaven, and what it's a reference to. We already spent weeks fruitlessly speculating over whether Mephisto would be showing up in WandaVision. No need to go through any of that again. So, there you go. I mean, for me, I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed the setup of this show. I think if nothing else, it's about character, and that's what I always want for my shows. Character first. You give me characters I can be interested in and care about. And even watching Hiddleston's acting in the first episode, it's so great to watch. And it really is. It asks some very compelling questions about what is identity and all kinds of things like that. And I think that that's the real strength. It appears to me to be the real strength of the show. Adding to that, the whole idea of the Time Variance Authority is very, very interesting, and how they brought that into the MCU. So while I could take offense at maybe some of the smaller things in the show, which I really don't because I think it's fascinating, there is a lot of things that I can understand people are already complaining and bitching and moaning about, and I don't want to take anything away from their criticisms. But I think for the most part, once again, they're really going for broke here. They're showing us something they haven't really shown before. They're going back into the comic book lore, and they're really doing something, I think, unique and unusual with it. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. I think Hiddleston's never been better. I think Owen Wilson and Hiddleston have some real good chemistry. I really enjoy the depiction for the most part of the TVA, and I again have I don't know where this is going, and I'm curious to see where it's going. And I think once again, as far as science fiction, fantasy, and horror television shows, this is top notch. This is feature film quality, and I'm really anxious to see where this is all going. So I don't want to get in really to spoilers, but I'm very curious to hear what you all think. So let's delve into what you're saying. Jamie Wright writes in and says, "Hi Rob, I hope you and the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity are doing well. Recently you mentioned how you wanted the Burnettwork to be like a real TV network with shows coming out 24/7. I thought of an idea where you could do a weekly or fortnightly, or however you feel like, book club. This could help many of the people in the Post-Geek Singularity could recommend their favorite books and talk with people about it and help more people get into reading older novels. This was just a little idea I had, and I thought you might want to hear it so you could expand your network." Jamie, that's not a bad idea. The Robservations book club. Maybe. I mean, that could be a lot of fun. I don't know. That would really be up to people. The question is, would people do the homework? Starting a book club, you would hope that people would read the books. But if they're not going to read the books, I think it'd be really hard to do it. I don't know. But people have asked me to do that before. And so it's not a bad idea. It's not something absolutely that I would be adverse to. I think it could be kind of fun, though. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would really enjoy that idea. So it's really up to you. If I get a lot of feedback, maybe it's something that we could absolutely do. Joey writes in and says, "The science of Star Trek: The Next Generation. I thought I'd riff on the way my 20-something brain reconciled the physics of Next Generation after the original series made so much sense to me. The old series had very good scientific speculation and seemed well built upon what we could see and understand then. To me, duotronics was an allegory from the transition from vacuum tubes to transistors. Quantum mechanics was a kind of magic that enabled Einstein and Teller to speculate and come up with nuclear fission and fusion. Spock's wrangling with vacuum tubes in the city on the edge of forever startled me as a joke about our primitive use of vacuum tubes in the back of many color TV sets in the 60s. I am surprised Captain Picard and Mr. Data never revisited that city on the edge of tomorrow, then as now. The world that we live in is sketched and colored like a coloring book with the lines of current physics and the crayons of modern science and astronomy. But our brains are a little bigger because of the internet. We are the binaries on the cusp of becoming the Twitter Borg, the I'm saying binaries. That's an interesting, instead of the binars, binaries. On the cusp of becoming the Twitter Borg. However, resistance is not futile. Anyhow, the next generation seemed to take the physics of Kirk and Spock's time for granted. It was simply scaled up. But they were in the middle of an era of information overload, evolving or envying what Dr. Sung had achieved with Data. It was a bit odd in that everyone wanted to be like Data but settled for trying to use Data as a tool, or tended to treat him like a kind-hearted fool. Only Mr. Barclay tried to exceed his capabilities, augmenting his abilities inadvertently to save the Enterprise in the nth degree. I always wondered if he really did give up those abilities or they were merely hidden from him, told he was all better now and to run along by the Cytherians. In that episode, The Nth Degree, Barclay speculated everything had a unique electromagnetic signature and could be read like a computer subroutine to understand it. A very surprising clue to the world of science in the next generation, with all the subspace structures and bubbles and integration of things like transporters and over 2 centuries of warp speed travel, they were beginning to suspect their world was built on top of a much larger reality. I wouldn't say a hologram or a simulation as in Ship in a Bottle, but more like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Their reality, our world today, was thought to be more like a stage on which spotlights projected from a larger reality, the light from the spotlight manifesting as the physics carry out a play in order to work out a problem. And as the characters in their play work out the rules, they discovered Newton's laws of gravity, Einstein's relativistic equations, and quantum mechanics. They were beginning to learn how to edit the play, which is when Q stepped on the stage. I know Q represented a question, the question that still burned hot in space, the question that remains today unanswered. An interloper from another part of this larger realm, perhaps not the largest concentric circle of the Russian doll of a universe, he was in his own way an explorer, either tasked or bored with his existence, waiting on the humans to pass his way, entertaining himself until his part in the play arrived. I would have liked to imagine that Star Trek The New Frontier might have seen Enterprise revisit the Guardian of Time and the Department of Temporal Investigations, keeping the rules of engagement in their small corner of the galaxy in line with the singular manageable timeline, civilized while also contemplating what lies beyond our galaxy, out there amongst the final frontier. We now know about dark matter, sort of, and the Q and the explorers from the Andromeda Galaxy. After Voyager's return from the Gamma Quadrant, much of the galaxy would be mapped and roughly explored. The galaxy would be a much smaller place. I would think in some ways charting the pathways of the dark matter bridges linking the nearby galaxies and beyond would have astronomers and explorers alike chomping at the bit to cross the Great Barrier and see just how far they could get in 5 years. New technologies and ideologies and things never seen or understood before, just waiting to be explored. I just think we should go further, more daring, bolder than ever before, and learning ever so much about ourselves as we try and understand the great stage from which we all perform. Well, I rant. Good night, Bob. Or Rob. What a great letter. I want to say thank you for that letter, Joey. A lot of interesting points that you brought up. I mean, in a way, the same is true of, I think, of Loki. I mean, I was arguing with Az about free will and determination, and he was saying that there is no free will because the timeline is already set. But I would say that the timeline that's already set was set because of our free will. It didn't just come into being all at once. It had to be created through all of history. So our timeline that exists with a beginning and an end. And everything in between, the timeline that was built and created, was because of us, because of our free will. But once it gets to the end, and once the timeline came into full existence, meaning all of creation happened, and then it went all the way to the end of existence, the end of the universe, then what that did was spring into place, well, the multiverse or whatever, but the timeline is to be preserved. That's the real timeline, and it exists. You can't change it, but it wasn't that we were being told what to do or our lives were sent in a different direction. No, that exists because that was the timeline we, with our free will, created, and when it got to the end of that timeline, that was then the sacred timeline. So at least that's the way I looked at it. I thought it was, I really enjoyed it. So, yeah. but I could get into that. I won't get into. I want to talk about it after you guys have seen it. So I think that would be something I'll talk about later. This letter comes from Jamie Wright. Hi, Rob. I hope you're doing well. Recently, I've wanted to start buying cool film t-shirts like the ones you always wear. Any chance you could recommend some of the businesses you buy from so I could get some? Also, do you know any websites that sell cheap action figures so I can start buying them to begin my collection? Well, Jamie, Last Exit to Nowhere. Last Exit to Nowhere is where I always go to buy geeky shirts. Basically, they have shirts that are mostly logos or designs from within the universe of the movies that they're from, which is why I love them. You have to know the movies. It's not just like Tron, it'll be a Flynn's Arcade shirt. You have to know that Flynn's Arcade was in Tron, which makes them cool. So it's not only, they're not only great shirts to get, but it also proves it's a litmus test for all the true geeks that you are going to meet based on how people like your shirt. So I very much enjoy that. So that's where I would check out. Go to, again, Last Exit to Nowhere. Let's see. Anaru comes to us. Anaru like kangaroo. Kia ora, Rob. Anaru again, like kangaroo. Thanks again so much for reading my letter and clarifying the main difference between Marvel and DC. I hope Chapek doesn't ruin Marvel with unnecessary suits. I haven't tried Monteith's Black yet, so I'll have to give it a shout next. That was a beer I was drinking in New Zealand. It's a great New Zealand beer. I liked it. I'm listening to info coming out regarding the Spider-Verse. I'm not calling it the Sony universe of Uncle Ben's sister's father's thrice removed called Stan of Marvel characters. And specifically the info relating to Wanda, Doctor Strange, Spidey, the Spider-Verse and its characters, and Kraven. I have a little theory, or an angle for Kraven. Sony and Kevin Feige have said or alluded to that it is likely that Spidey will cross over with Venom and other Spider-Verse characters, as Sony are desperate. Like, call me back, Kevin, desperate to get their Spider-Verse off the ground, which I hope they do well. It has also been reported that Spider-Man No Way Home, they're indeed leaning into the Spider-Verse area, and that Spider-Man No Way Home title could be a reference to the villains getting stuck here, or in the main MCU or SVU Spider-Verse. And I know this is a big if. That is true. I have a theory about how they could, in a sense, reverse story tell Kraven of sorts. Reverse Kraven's story. It's said that the movie is based on Kraven's last hunt. Well, how about this? As to elevate his character, have him not be a hero, but rather an anti-hero, all the rage at the moment, and create a narrative by which he can flip sides later back to being a Spidey adversary, a bit like John Walker masked with Killmonger. Instead of Kraven's last hunt, they could make it Kraven's first hunt. He could go after some or all the villains of the Sinister Six stuck in the MCU Spideyverse over his trilogy, building his character's story and popularity and teaming with Spidey initially, only to eventually come to loggerheads with Spider-Man, a.k.a. the Punisher or Daredevil. Enter great scene when the two are just talking about their ideologies before realizing they're on different sides of the line, Kraven now viewing besting Spider-Man in battle as his endgame, and thus coming full circle with Kraven's last hunt in Spider-Man. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that idea out there. Maybe Sony thought of it already. I think it ticks most of the boxes, and you could weave in compelling reasons why. Kraven must do this, and why he slowly descends into that mindset, and why Spidey feels he's going too far, and they eventually clash. What do you think? Your friend Anaru. Well, I like that idea. I don't know if they're going to flip it that much, but I definitely think there are shenanigans happening with this new Spider-Man movie that's going to lead Spider-Man directly toward being in a Sony Marvelverse movie, or the Marvel Universe S or something. Call it like that. I don't know. I think that it's not a bad idea. I think maybe it could happen. I don't know if they're going to alter the Kraven storyline that much, but they've got no reason to be slavishly devoted to it, I don't think. So we'll see. You know, who's to say? Creation Bimo writes in and says, Dear Rob, my name is Moses, and I'm an imagination connoisseur from Canada, BC. I discovered your channel through Geeks and Gamers, and I remember a stream of yours. You were talking about something you worked on, a Native American trailer or commercial. I thought that was cool. I'm Native American, and I'm from the Shuswap territory, and my mother's side is from the Okanagan. I'm sure you're aware of how things were back in the day. My grandfather was a survivor of KRS, the Kamloops Indian Residential School. His name was Opie Oppenheim, and he recently passed away from COVID. He got into drugging and drinking after leaving the school. He tried to go to public school after and got into too many fights. He was at a rock bottom, sitting against a dumpster in a Vancouver Hastings, eating garbage and shooting up. He found Jesus and accepted the path, and he got well. He became the amazing and inspiring man I remember him as. He helped a lot of people get sober and helped them through his art and comedy. He was a native flute maker, a painter, a jeweler, a carver, and a comedian. I would like to send you a print of one of his paintings one of these days. I would like that. After he passed away, the remains of 215 confirmed children were found buried outside of the KIRS residential school. They used a ground radar to detect the bones. They were tortured, frozen to death, burned, starved, and worse. There are still many children yet to be found at other residential schools. 215 lights were placed outside the school along with toys, clothes, and shoes. This has been hard for the elders and the children of survivors. I am the second generation that did not have to go to residential school. A few days after my grandpa passed away, people started coming. A fire was lit and kept going for 4 days. I watched this fire every night. I was forced to interact with family I don't see much as I wanted to keep my head down, and we ended up talking for hours and hours. Family and families from other territories sang by his fire. I have a video on my channel of my cousins singing the Sasquatch song I think you would like. My grandfather passing was horrible, but it brought us together. My uncles and cousins singing as loud as they can while pounding their drums hard enough that I felt it through my chest while I bawled over my grandfather's dead body is something I will never forget. My mental health was not the best before he passed. I'm still working on some things, but who ain't? It was coming together that made me feel better. It should not be death that brings us together. We need to visit family and embrace those who love us. Like you said before, human interaction is important. Your channel is great, people. Your channel is great. People need to write letters these days and talk with others. I've not written anything this long since school. I'm 21 and I'm a huge Blade Runner fan, and I'm currently finishing up a fan film based on the underground resistance. I'm also excited for Dune. I read the first 35 pages and then fell off, but I'll finish it. Thank you for inspiring me and many others, man. And again, that comes from Creation Bimo. Well, Creation, you know what? It's funny that you ask. On my original YouTube page, I have that. I put that up. So, let's see if I can find it. I'll go to my other channel and my first channel and see if I can find this. I'm actually really proud of this piece we did. It's very interesting. Oh, wait a minute. Is it on here? Oh, here it is. Here is the... I'll put this in the live chat if you're listening to this right now. So, this is an interesting piece that I did. I'll put this in the live chat. So, I was hired back in the, I think, 94 by a woman who subsequently passed away named Baba Cooper. And she never directed anything in her life, and she made this public service announcement for the Iroquois Confederacy of Nations, because in 1987 Congress passed recognition that the Iroquois Confederacy of Nations had a role to play in defining our Constitution, that some of the concepts of our Constitution came from the Iroquois Confederacy of Nations. So she did this public service announcement, and she hired me to edit it. And I didn't know much about the Iroquois Confederacy, and I got to meet some of the tribal elders and things and worked on this. And we got Robbie Robertson of the band to record the voiceover and the music. And so that was pretty exciting, and it won a few awards. Wow, it's got 55,000 views. That's crazy. I put this up on YouTube, Wow, 13 years ago, 14 years ago. That's crazy. But yeah, so that's a commercial I did, and unfortunately Baba passed away, but we're both proud that we worked on this. So yeah, thanks for writing in. And for those of you who don't know, there were Catholic-run schools that indigenous people were forced to go. The KRS schools, the Kamloops Indian Residential School. These Indian residential schools were run by Catholic missionaries and priests, and they did not treat and I'm not trying to disparage the Catholic Church in any way, but it didn't go well, and they found in one of these places, they found over 200 bodies recently. Pretty scary, pretty depressing stuff. And it's definitely rough. Definitely rough. But I want to thank you for writing in. I hope you can take a look at the video. I hope you enjoy it. I mean, I loved working on it. And it was one of my first freelance jobs where I had cushy jobs working for ad agencies, but I bailed to start on my own. And it was tough. You know, it was a big decision to do that. But I was very happy, and the fact that we got a lot of notoriety for it. So that was good. That was very good. Stubble McShave writes in. And Stubble McShave, this is a very long letter, but Terrier, or maybe Terrier was telling me about the Turkish version. But this is from Stubble. Stubble says, "Hi, Rob. On a tip on the show the other day, I said I would write in about this. I tried to make it short, but it's hard to condense some of these things, so I'm fully aware that it will probably not be read on the show because of its length. Oh, are you wrong? You've been talking about James Bond for the last couple of days, and I thought I should mention the Swedish version of a literary Bond-type character and a little about the author. The author, Jan Guillou, came from a rich family which had its origin in France and Norway. He was beaten by his stepfather on a regular basis. He was relegated from several schools because of theft, abuse, and blackmail. A part of his later childhood can be seen in the movie Evil, which was nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Film in 2004 and is really good. He was part of the anti-fascist and anti-imperialistic organization Klart in his teens. The organization declared themselves as a communistic organization in the mid-60s, and that was about the time when he left the organization. As far as I know, his political views right now are a bit left of center. I would say Jan, but it's probably Jan, became a journalist, and in the early 70s, he became known for publishing some troubling articles on the Swedish intelligence service. He was sentenced to serve some time in prison for espionage. During his time in prison, he thought that, since he had a lot of information and contacts in both Swedish and international intelligence services, he should write books about a secret agent. This could also showcase the political situations in both our country as well as other countries that the character could visit in his missions. From the initial inspiration while in prison, it would take a decade until the first book came out. The character was Carl Gustav Gilbert Hamilton, and named after Lewis Gilbert and Guy Hamilton, perhaps, who directed Bond films, and was a man from a noble line but had revolted against his family and had a lot in common with the political views of the author. He joined the most advanced Swedish military commando troops to protect the country against imperialistic Soviet attacks, and he thought would come. It was during his training that he was conscripted by the intelligence service as a new type of prototype special agent. He was sent to the USA for 5 years, where he got an education in computer science and special military training. During his 5-year stay in the U.S., he let one of his friends invest in a substantial inheritance, and when he got back, it had multiplied several times, and he was now financially independent. That's the background to his character, and the first book takes place soon after his return from the U.S. The military hadn't established a place for him in the organization, and he gets lent out to the Swedish security service. Here are brief descriptions of the book. The first 4 are described in a little more than the rest. In the first book, Coq Rouge, C-O-Q, Coq Rouge. I like Coq Rouge. He is part of an investigation that tries to uncover the murder of a high-ranking officer in the security service. The book almost mirrors the focus of the investigation into the uncovering of the murder of the Swedish Prime Minister, Olof Palme, where the police and the security service focused a lot of their investigations on immigrant groups. It was all a coincidence since the book was written before the murder of the Prime Minister, and the similarities made the book more popular. In the second book, The Democratic Terrorists, the West German Security Service has need of a Swedish colleague to help them infiltrate a remaining group of the Red Army faction. The terrorist group is supposedly building a terrorist operation in Sweden. Carl Hamilton is the perfect choice with his military training and somewhat radical background in the leftist movement. In the third book, In the Interest of the Nation, Hamilton has been transferred to the military intelligence he was intended for. His first mission is to escort a defecting Soviet admiral from Cairo to Sweden, and they soon learn that the Soviet armed forces had installed secret underwater bases in the Stockholm archipelago. In the shadow of this great threat to the nation, Hamilton is tormented by a guilt from a brutal murder in his private life that was a result of reflexes that he developed during his intense military training. Can he be tried for murder when a nation needs him, or will it be swept under the carpet by higher powers because of interest in the nation? The fourth book is Enemy's Enemy. A Soviet defector in London feeds the Swedish Security Service false information that Hamilton is a double agent working for the Soviet Union. Much of this information seems to come from another Swedish double agent who has recently escaped Swedish prison and is now guarded by the Soviets in Moscow. This leads to the disturbing question if the Swedish military intelligence can conduct a secret murder on one of their own citizens. Hamilton takes on the fake job of a military attaché to Moscow and must try and fool the KGB and GRU in order to carry out his mission. He uses all the methods in his playbook to fool their intense surveillance. It's one of the best books in the series and is the only one I've seen that's been released in English. I highly recommend it. There are a lot of other books. The Honorable Murderer is about an investigation into murders of high-ranking officers and has traces about a possible Nazi past. Vendetta touches on the Sicilian Mafia and is a revenge story. No Man's Land features a disturbing mission into Russia to stop a smuggling operation of nuclear weapons, where he has orders to destroy all the evidence of human tissue. The Only Victory is a continuation of No Man's Land, where it's revealed that the events in No Man's Land was just a big diversion and Hamilton must trace the nuclear weapons with the help of all his sources from other intelligence services. In On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the MI5 and the MI6 need the assistance of Hamilton. Meanwhile, enemies from his earlier adventures take sinister revenge upon him. The last book of the main series is A Citizen Raised Above Every Suspicion. His private life is in ashes because of the revenge taken on him in the previous book. A lot of information agents are being murdered and they need to investigate who's killing them. There are a few more books outside the 10-page series, and they are outriggers to the series. The events of the book take place from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, and some of it features the changes that happen in the Soviet Union as the Iron Curtain crumbles. A few of the books have been made into movies. Coq Rouge and the Democratic Terrorist star Stellan Skarsgård. The first is somewhat of a murder mystery, and the second is a drama thriller. The movie Hamilton, starring Peter Stormare, is an adaptation of No Man's Land and The Only Victory. It's okay, but it has too low budget for the effects that's needed, as well as some really bad product placement. There are also some other TV productions. My suggestion for anyone who wants to watch one of the movies or read one of the books is to watch The Democratic Terrorist and to read Enemy's Enemy. Enemy's Enemy is probably the best book and the only one that's been published in English, as far as I know. I also recommend the movie Evil. That's a semi-autobiographical movie about a period in the author's life where he was staying at a boarding school that had corporal punishment from a student council that exercised satanic rule both physically and psychologically over the other students. I hope you found it interesting. I can also recommend his Crusades trilogy, as well as his 10 books about the Great Century, which tells the story of one of humanity's greatest, bloodiest, and most cruel century, the 20th, from the perspective of a family dynasty. Well, Stubble, that sounds good to me. I love stories like this. I wasn't aware of it, but hey, I'm in. Count me in. Like, why not? I'll do it. So, hey, there you go. Let's see what you guys are saying over here, because I want to know. First, we have sending in a super chat. Thank you for that super chat. Check the sticker. I'd imagine it was a diamond, so I can shine on, you crazy diamond. Willow says, since you were talking about Brian Fuller making a Christine movie earlier, apart from length, what are some of the biggest differences between directing an episode of television and a feature-length film? Good question, Willow. Directing a feature-length film and directing TV, while they might seem similar, are very different. First of all, on a feature film, everything begins and ends with the director. I mean, sure, the producer might have found the property, but the director is filtering all of the creative decisions through their vision. Whereas a director on a TV show is hired to facilitate that TV show. You, as a director, you don't get to come in and change everything the way you want it. You're working within the paradigm that has been previously established on that show. So really, the person who runs the set on a TV show is the first AD, because he has to keep things running, and everyone else, because they're there every single day. And a director to direct TV is working within the paradigm they've created. So it's a very different experience. People have said that directing TV is like directing traffic. Well, not quite. But in a way, it's sort of similar. I think the best thing to do, when you're making a TV show, you don't get a lot of say into, say, the set design or the costume design or anything like that. It's because it's been established. But you can still work within the television paradigm and do good work. You work with the actors, you create great character moments, but a lot of the things that you do as a director on a feature film, like pick out your sets, figure out how you guys are going to shoot, that's all been sort of taken care of and handled by the veterans who know how to shoot on all the standing sets. And that's not to say you can't put your own imprimatur on it, because you can, but you're the guru, you're the grand poobah on a movie set, and on a TV set you're simply a functionary, and some functionaries have more input than others. Gunnar sends in a super chat and says, I really enjoyed your perspective on Loki, Rob, as someone who didn't grow up on DC and Marvel, but on Disney and French and Belgian comics. Oh, well, thank you. I mean, we've had some really great discussions about Loki today. I just wanted to bring up some things that, and basically tell everybody I'm really loving where Loki's going. I mean, will it stick the landing? I don't know. I hope it does. So, Gunnar, thanks for writing in, and thanks for definitely super chatting and all that. So that's great. Brendan Sheehy sends in a tip and says, Rob, did you notice how much influence Terry Gilliam's Brazil had on the first episode of Loki? Yeah, it's kind of hard not to notice. That and the Adjustment Bureau. It pleases me that there are Gilliam fans within the creative team at Marvel. TG even tackled the concept of predestination versus free will. Oh, Terry Gilliam even tackled the concept of predestination versus free will in his classic 12 Monkeys. Yeah, and he did a really good job of it. I thought that was great. That's great to point out. Nice pull. Brandon goes on to say, Rob, I recently watched the recent Predator, and man, was I disappointed. Nonsensical, ludicrous, and not an ounce of tension. Even Shane Black's character banter, to which I usually love, is horribly forced and unfunny. Time to put the Predator franchise to bed. Or at least get it a good script. The Predator can come back after a good script. Royce Freeman sends in a super chat and says, thoughts about casting people to play things that they're not, and decide about appropriation and when it's appropriate to cast somebody? Well, look, I think my philosophy is you can cast anybody to play anything. Period. It's up to the director, and it's up to the casting person to work, and the producer to come out with the best people for the job. I think I cast the best actors. That's it. I don't care who and what they are. If I have a part in mind and I have a character that I want somebody to play, I'm going to go after that character. That's it. I don't do anything else. I don't worry about cultural appropriation either. It should be obvious if you're making a movie about a certain group of people, what group of people you're making the movie about. So that's kind of what I would say. So, to me, if I always go back to Red, to Morgan Freeman in Shawshank Redemption. If somebody didn't have the foresight, they could have said, no, Rhett's a white dude, a white Irish dude. We're not going to cast Morgan Freeman. But they did. And the rest is history. So I think people should be cast to play whoever they can play. Whoever's best for the role should get it. But that's up to the director, the producer, and the casting person, really. So Gunnar sends in a super chat. Why, thank you, Gunnar. Ironically, the residential schools were seen at the time as a good thing to help the indigenous population and make up for colonization. When righting wrongs, beware not to create new wrongs. Oh, I couldn't agree more. And those are horrible things to have to endure, so I'm sorry that you and your family did. Twin Flick says, did you catch the trailer for the Apple new series Invasion? God, I forgot to watch it. I know it dropped today. My God, this looks amazing with Apple's future TV and movie slate. I think they're going to dominate within the next year. So Apple has a series coming out called Invasion that, kind of like World War Z, is going to examine different people's points of view from across the planet to create one story. And I'm very, very excited for it. I haven't watched the trailer, though. Really looking forward to that. So that's fun. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, "What's up, Rob? So it's time for the weekend box office predictions. But, Rob, my crystal ball is cloudy. The press seems very bullish on In the Heights, but when I look at seat reservations so far and trailer views, it looks so-so. What do you sense, Rob?" Well, I thought In the Heights was going to do really, really well, but like you, I'm not feeling a lot of excitement about it. But who knows? Maybe the word of mouth is going to be great. I really like the opening scene a lot. And they published the first 8 minutes online. I was like, I'll watch this. It looked really good. I think I'm into it. I'm into it. And Twin Flicks, like you said, Apple they're going to come out guns blazing with their new stuff. But I think, Nick, I think you're probably right about that. I don't know if it's going to do very well. I think it's going to do pretty well, though. I would never bet against Lin-Manuel Miranda. Not going to do it. Oh, wow. Mexican Iron Man says, "R&B, please text me or Twitter a pic of which Iron Man version hot toy, like as I got a designer toy artist to mod you a Mexican Iron Man, but which hot toy version you want, Rob? Hail, Post-Geek Singularity Stream, and wenches." Actually, wrenches. I said wenches. I don't know. I didn't mean to disparage anyone, especially not you, Joshua. You're not a wench. You're a wrench. Mexican Iron Man, I will do just that. That's pretty pricey, but if you're going to... Who am I going to say no? I want a Mexican Iron Man. I'll make it visible on this channel to view. I'll send you that right away. I mean, you know what? I can even tell you. I will go to Sideshow right now. Since I'm live on the screens, and since you asked, I'm going to go to Sideshow right now, and I'm going to find out which version would be best to modify that's actually in stock. But I'm thinking probably, well, I don't know why I can't seem to go to, why my internet is being so wacky. But I would think hang on, now I'm going to, let me tell you, since I'm now here. The ones that they have in. This is tough. Oh, I know. You know what? The unique one. The Iron Man Mark 21 Midas. It's gold. That, I think, would lend itself really well to Mexican Iron Man. So it's the Iron Man Mark 21 Midas. I think that one would be best. And they have that. In but that's a very expensive proposition. But I really love this. I don't know if I would get it because it's not canonical, but I love it, and I think that it would be great. And if not that, I'll tell you another one, which could be kind of cool, is the Iron Man Mark IV holographic version. Now that is not, I don't believe that's, or maybe it is die-cast, but the holographic version that's clear, that could be pretty cool too. I would leave that up to your artist or you. I would say captain's discretion. Which would be better? I am not sure. I mean, obviously, I'd rather have the Midas one, to be honest. But there you go. There you go. Swack Props sends in a tip and says, "Hey, Rob, Brian Fuller in a new adaptation of Christine. Exciting news indeed. I can't wait." Well, I'm really happy for Brian Fuller. For those of people who don't know, my good buddy Brian Fuller is, in fact, who I've interviewed on this channel, is now slated to write and direct the new adaptation of Stephen King's Christine, first adapted back in '83 by John Carpenter, same year the book came out. I'm very excited for Brian. I mean, horror is his jam, and I can only imagine that whatever he comes up with is going to be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. So hopefully it's going to be great, and I think it will be. So there you go. And you know what? On that note, I'm going to bring this one again a little early, bring it to a close, bring this chat to a close, bring this shindig to a close. I want to thank, first of all, my moderating staff. I want to thank, beginning with Mike Bodden, and we've got here, I know the Richards here, Louise X. Sparrow, Joshua Levesque. I think I got it. Did I get it? Darren Seeley is here. Bunyan Snipe is here. Wow, a lot of people. I want to thank you all for being the awesome moderators that you are. And Greg Smith, I don't know if he's here. I'm going to thank him anyway. I want to thank my moderating staff. They're terrific. And I want everyone to remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to you, have a better day. And remember, I will be back on tonight for the Midnighter. I am not on John Campia's show tomorrow, but tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. on the Midnight's Edge channel, I am moderating a discussion, a reunion of Edward James Olmos, actually Mr. Edward James Olmos, and Lou Diamond Phillips to talk about the movie Stand and Deliver. That is correct. Edward James Olmos and Lou Diamond Phillips will be on along with other members of the cast for tomorrow's 10 a.m. reunion for the film Stand and Deliver. Put that in your pipes and smoke it because it should be great fun. I'm really looking forward to speaking with Mr. Edward James Olmos, and I can't wait. It's going to be a really great time will be had by all. I look forward to sharing that with you. It's pretty special, and I want to thank Midnight's Edge for including me in these kinds of events because they're pretty damn exciting. So thank you, Midnight's Edge. I very much appreciate it. And on that note, I will finally say to all of you, have a better day.